Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IAC Culture Talks 2025 series. I'm Professor Jing Han, the Director of the Institute for Australian and Chinese Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of a biomedical people of the Darug Nation, whose ancestors have been the traditional owners of their land for thousands of years. And we would like to pay our respect to the First Nations elders, past and present. We are very excited that the first talk in the 2025 series is in partnership with the Writing and Society Research Centre in School of Humanities and Communication Arts at Western Sydney University for our shared interest in and fascination with the topic of this talk, exophony and its transformative power. This subject speaks to a lot of us in Australia as an immigration country. Many of us have experiences in exophonic writing or have read books written by exophonic writers. So we are very keen to listen to the speaker of this talk, Dr. Isabelle Li. Isabelle herself is a Chinese-Australian writer and translator based in Sydney. She has a Doctor of Creative Arts from Western Sydney University. She's our alumni. She has published in various anthologies and literary journals, including The Best Australian Stories, Southerly, Westerly, UTS Writers Anthology, and Works. Her collection of short stories, A Chinese Affair, was published by Margaret River Press in 2016. Her English translations of poetry and prose by a renowned Chinese writer, Zheng Xiaoqun, have been published in Australia. She has also translated English literature into Chinese. So her own creative writing experience has led her to this research area, which we found very intriguing. So now please welcome Dr. Isabelle Li to give us the talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Jing Han, for such a warm welcome and introduction. Hi, everybody. My talk today is part of my DCA, supervised by Gail Jones and Chris Andrews. For people who aren't familiar with this particular academic qualification, Doctor of Creative Arts has a creative component and a theoretical component called exegesis. So for my exegesis, supervised by poet and translator Chris Andrews, I selected for critical analysis works by Jhumpa Lahiri and Yiyun Li, two female contemporary writers who have adopted exophonic writing in Italian and English, respectively. So today I will focus on my study of Yiyun Li. Firstly, the concept of exophony. Exophony is a relatively new term that describes the long-standing and increasingly widespread phenomenon of authors writing in a second or third language for literary purposes. To grasp the concept of exophony, it is worthwhile to consider it in the context of migration. When Chinese Australian writer Ha Jin published The Writer as Migrant, a slender collection of 3 luminous essays in 2008, the word exophony had just been coined. Jin sets out to investigate some of the metaphysical aspects of a migrant writer's life and work. Jin's migrant encompasses all kinds of people who move or are forced to move from one country to another, such as exiles, emigrants, immigrants, and refugees, although he gives special attention to exile. As a Chinese Australian writer working mainly in English, I am keen to survey the exophonic experience and consider how the adoption of a foreign literary language can shape a writer's self-work and creative practice. I will next introduce 5 Chinese writers of Chinese origin who have chosen to write in English to demonstrate the diversity of their circumstances and varying degree of success. Lin Yutang was possibly one of the first Chinese writers to practice exophony. A linguist, novelist, and translator, Lin lived mostly in the United States during the second half of his life. His novel, Moment in Peking, written in English, tells the story of two sisters in early 20th century China with a large cast of supporting characters. In Ha Jin's essay, The Spokesman and the Tribe, he recounts Lin's experience in exile, analyzes his work before and during his exile, and evaluates his literary achievement as a spokesman for China. Jin suggests positioning oneself as spokesman can potentially hinder a writer's contribution to literature, notwithstanding that a writer should be responsible to his fellow citizens. Quote, all the writer can strive for is a personal voice. His work will be of little value if not realized as art. End of quote. Lin Shuhua was a more controversial figure. She is best known for her English autobiography, Ancient Melodies. In 1935, still married, Lin met Virginia Woolf's nephew, Julian Bell, while he was teaching English at Wuhan University, and had an affair with him. Through Bell's connection, Lin started corresponding with Woolf, who suggested Lin persist with her English written in a Chinese style to retain as much Chinese flavor as possible. Eileen Chang is one of the most important Chinese modernist writers, renowned for her evocative language and elegant style, and in my opinion, also for her aesthetics of decay. The famous quote, "Life is an opulent gown covered with lice," captures her idiosyncrasy and acerbity. Chang was born in Shanghai. As a child prodigy, she wrote her debut novel at the age of 12. She was bilingual. Her Chinese pen name, Ailing, was a transliteration of her English name, Eileen. Chang left Shanghai for Hong Kong in 1952, where she wrote The Rice Sprout Song, her first English novel, and Naked Earth, both of which she later translated into Chinese. In 1955, she left Hong Kong for the United States, where she translated a Qing dynasty novel, self-translated, and continued writing in 2 languages. Chang wrote her most memorable stories in her 20s, and her characters are quintessentially Shanghainese. As if anticipating the later obscurity, she made this comment, "To be famous, I must hurry, 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 or it'll be too late, too late." A more recent example is Qiu Xiaolong, a novelist, poet, and literary translator. Qiu has published in English 9 procedural crime novels based in Shanghai, featuring Inspector Chen, who is also a poet. Alongside the major theme of politics in modern-day China, Qiu offers glimpses into Chinese poetry and philosophy, Chinese cuisine, architecture, and history. Qiu's English has strong Chinese characteristics, as though the sentences first emerge as Chinese in his consciousness and are then translated into English. Ha Jin is another exophonic writer. He originally wanted to speak for all the downtrodden citizens of the country he had left behind, a sentiment common among migrant writers. But over time, he has renounced the role of a spokesman, realizing he must learn to stand alone as a writer. Lin Yutang's attempt at becoming a spokesman, Lin Shuhua's exoticizing of the English language, Eileen Chang's loss of subject in exile, Qiu Xiaolong's Chinese culture showcase, and Ha Jin's solid labor in literary fiction are but a small sample. There are many other Chinese writers practicing exophony in different languages. Given such diversity and range, I have positioned my close reading to be generative rather than deductive. I'll now give a close reading of Yiyun Li. Against propaganda, Yiyun Li's resolute renunciation of the Chinese language. Yiyun Li grew up in China and lives in the United States, writing in English. She's the author of 8 books of fiction and the winner of a MacArthur Genius Grant and a Guggenheim Fellowship, among other prestigious awards. Li left China at the age of 23. She has only written creatively in English. Despite being adamant that her writing is apolitical, Li has declined to be translated into Chinese. She said in various interviews, "China is not ready for me, and I'm not ready for China." What is her relationship with the Chinese language? Does criticism in the mother tongue sound more unbearable and cause more anxiety, like criticism from the mother? Is a migrant writer more vulnerable to the judgment of their compatriots for betrayal of their language? In my close reading, I have approached the chosen texts of Li's with the hypothesis that they are metafictions that reflect or encode the writer's linguistic predicaments. I must add a footnote here. I finished my exegesis in 2022, and in 2023, Li's books Must I Go and Tolstoy Together were indeed translated into Chinese and published in China. So perhaps China is ready for Li now, and she is ready for China. I admit to being indifferent to writers' biographies. Researching exophony has led me to Yiyun Li's memoir, Dear Friend, From My Life, I Write to You in Your Life. Li's book has changed my reading life. The penguin paperback is shrouded in an autumnal yellow, with an illustrated image of a woman sitting alone on a park bench, reading in a shower of leaves. Her posture is tender, almost familiar, the mood melancholic. In the grip of suicidal depression, twice hospitalized, Li gives an account of her personal history, her pain of living with overwhelming emptiness, her struggle in search of a solid self, her relationships with the English and Chinese languages, and her continuous dialogues with writers who inspire in her a sense of kinship. An avid reader and well-versed in literary history, Li draws telling details from the works, letters, journals, and biographies of eminent writers, among them Thomas Hardy, Ivan Turgenev, and Stefan Zweig. In a meandering fashion, interweaving close reading, personal encounters, and visits to birthplaces, burial sites, Li articulates her own innate necessity to read and what it takes to write. The 8 erudite essays chart the agonizing journey of a prodigious mind on the brink of disintegration, hanging onto the lifeline of literature and ultimately dragging itself out of the abyss. Li juxtaposes stories past and present, personal and anecdotal, accidental and faithful, historical and fictional, splicing a rippling and resonating narrative, building towards revelation and insight without handing down judgments. Her voice is precise and scrupulous, dissecting fiction and facts in search of truth. The resulting collection is compelling, challenging to read, and rewarding at every rereading. Li starts her title essay with the alluring idea of before and after. Transformation through cosmetic makeover, plastic surgery, personal effort, or relocation. For a decade, there had been a concrete after ingrained in everything I did. The day I arrived in America, I would become a new person. In Li's short story, 1,000 Years of Good Prayers, such drastic change is observed by a baffled father. Visiting his daughter in America after her divorce, Mr. Shi finds it difficult to connect with her. She has become a stranger, speaking English with a different voice, in an unconstrained manner. In Li's own experience, however, border crossing provides only illusory freedom, and although thoughts are bound to language, adopting a new language does not make a new person. What one carries from one point to another, geographically or temporally, is oneself. Even the most inconsistent person is consistently himself. Li's immutable self negates the demarcations of before and after, now and then, leaving the in-between, the present, as the site of suffering. Li's life has been blighted by calamity. Gleaning from the text, I have the impression that she was born to a domineering mother with an insatiable appetite for love and attention. Li was her favorite and had to witness her sister being devalued, though she was also the target of torment. Outside of their home, Li's mother was a beneficent and nurturing maths teacher. At home, she was, quote, a family despot, unpredictable in both her callousness and her vulnerability. Li's father was not spared the tyranny either, and could only try to instill in Li a sense of fatalism as self-protection. The family history is scattered in small doses as Li recollects her past, reluctantly reveals relevant details, and hints at stories she finds difficult to tell, refuses to tell, or wants to forget, which are followed by quick digressions. I wonder if it would have been possible at all for Li to recount her traumatic past without writing it in English. When the mother tongue provides no protection, while the adopted language offers a safe space, exophony is the only possibility. What sets Li's language switching apart from other exophonic writers is the absoluteness of her abandonment of the mother tongue. Quote, with such determination that it is a kind of suicide. Her essay, To Speak is to Blunder, but I Venture, goes into the heart of the matter. Nabokov once said, my private tragedy, which cannot, indeed should not, be anybody's concern, is that I had to abandon my natural language. Li quibbles with Nabokov's private tragedy because of the paradox of privacy and the implied spectators of a tragedy. While Nabokov considered Russian his natural language, Li has chosen English as her natural language. English has also become Li's private language in which she writes, thinks, talks to herself, and dreams, to the extent that while writing, she often forgets it is also used by others. Li likens one's relationship with the native language to that with the past, and considers her severance from the Chinese language a private salvation for which she resists, quote, any interpretation, political or historical or ethnographical. Li's brain, quote, has banished Chinese. English is the invocation that calls memories into existence while Chinese only erases them. In a dream, the old women from the neighborhood association in Beijing speak English to her. Li recalls her sister on the balcony singing a song translated into Chinese, but hears her singing it in English. In another episodic memory, she cannot visualize the items in it without naming them in English. Any recollection is a reconstruction, each word an open wound. Before a memory is allowed to resurface, the original Chinese in which the memory was coded must undergo a translation. The filtering effect of exophony is evident, as though the distant past, refracted with a kink, is submerged in a different medium. Li's decision to use the first person to write her personal history in Dear Friend was a turning point. Early in the book, Li denies being an autobiographical writer. I am not an autobiographical writer. One cannot be without a solid and explicable self, and read all autobiographical writers with the same curiosity. What kind of life permits a person the right to become his own subject? Halfway through the book, Li changes her view on autobiography. A writer can deny she is autobiographical, but what is revealed and what is concealed expose equally. One writes about what haunts one. Thus looked at, no one is exempt from being autobiographical. It is noticeable how often Li uses one, which comes across as very formal or even a little queenly, possibly her way to circumvent saying I. Quote, "A word I hate to use in English is I. It is a melodramatic word. In Chinese, a language less grammatically strict, one can construct a sentence with an implied subject pronoun and skip that embarrassing I, or else replace it with we. Living is not an original business. Indeed, when translating from English to Chinese, it is important to avoid overusing personal pronouns, which could make the translated text clumsy and cluttered. A review in The Guardian has neglected Li's sentiment about the equal weight of what is revealed and what is concealed. Quote, "Li has chosen to write a book that tells us little about China, or circumstantially about herself. We learn almost nothing about Li's childhood and hear hardly anything about her personal experience or the communist regime. There seems to be an expectation of anti-propaganda propaganda. You must write about how you were oppressed." Li has consistently resisted such implied imperatives. Rather than reading Dear Friend as a collection of personal essays, I have read it as fiction, curious about the character's fate during a bleak period of her life, concerned as she struggles to cope, being imprisoned by her own swirling, unsettling thoughts. Throughout the collection, Li applies adeptly the novelistic devices. Quote, to adjust times, linearity, and splice the less connected moments, end of quote, making the book an exhilarating read. Li's characters since then have resembled her, both in age and life experience. This turning point coincides with a soul-destroying event, a catastrophe so devastating it makes Li's past suffering but a dress rehearsal. 7 months after the publication of Dear Friend, Li's elder son, aged 16, took his own life. A short story titled, "When We Were Happy, We Had Other Names." Jia Yu grieves the loss of her teenage son by recording in a spreadsheet all the people she once knew who are now dead. In another short story, All Will Be Well, the narrator recalls her encounter with a hairdresser when she was a mother with young children, teaching writing at a university. The loss later in her life, she has lost a 16-year-old son, casts a melancholic light on her recollection of the hairdresser's own love story from a distant past in Vietnam. In the Writer's Voice podcast by The New Yorker, Li reads, "All will be well," her voice quivering like low clouds pregnant with moisture about to burst. In Where Reasons End, a book of mourning and meditation on love, loss, and language, a mother has an imaginary conversation with her dead 16-year-old son. The cover of the novel is devoid of any human presence. A puddle in the drizzle, reflecting bare branches against an inky sky. Fallen leaves scattering. As the central concern of Where Reasons End is existential, Li has the freedom to establish a world, unspecified in time and space, made up by words and words only. There the mother meets the son whom she has brought into existence twice, the first time through her body, the second time her words. Together they observe the common use of the English language, attending to its quirks and limitations, and arguing over metaphors, adverbs, adjectives, and nouns. They challenge each other, often resorting to speaking in riddles and koans. The linguistic aspects of the English language are called to the fore, especially those pertaining to time and space, and the imprecision and inadequacy of our vocabulary. The mother's lament echoes Li's despair in Dear Friend. There is no good language when it comes to the unspeakable. There is no precision, no originality, no perfection. At the end of the book, the mother tells the son that poems and stories are trying to speak what can't be spoken. Words fall short, but their shadows can reach the unspeakable. These characters are allegorical figures with an accidentally Chinese background. Human relationship is her drama, which requires minimal props and can be staged anywhere or nowhere. Li places her characters in a situation and isolates them. How people endure the lack of freedom is more interesting to me than their pursuit of it, as she said. She observes their ensuing struggle in desolation and with a scientist's unblinking eye pushes her experiment even further. No psychoanalysis, no exposition, no historical or social commentary. Li directs our gaze inwardly to see the human psyche, the inner workings of the mind. Such discovery through literature as a unique pathway to knowledge is not interchangeable with any other human endeavor. Li would like to be read as an American writer and see her work included as part of the American canon. Only then would she consider being translated into Chinese. In Dear Friend, Li recounts an incident at a festival to commemorate John McGurn in County Leitrim in Ireland. An old man came up to Li after an event and said, "The way you looked up when you talked, you reminded me of John. How could a Chinese woman resemble an Irish man? But the old man has hit a greater truth. Writers like Yiyun Li belong to the world." Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Isabel. It's a fascinating talk, and I'm sure there are a lot more that you have written about and you can talk about. So I will start with the questions. Audiences, if you have any questions, post it on Q&A, and while I'm having conversation with Isabel, I have so many questions. It's a really interesting topic, Exophony. And it's I'm sure it's kind of a long traditions, but it's just a long tradition, but it's kind of recent research. My first question is from your critical study of Yiyun Li, and she's such a typical example, and your own writing experience in exophonic writing. Do you see, are there constant conflicts between the acquired language and mother tongue, or interference from mother tongue, more in a negative way?
Well, my answer would be in terms of interference would be a definitive yes. The author's first or primary language continue to play a role in their exophonic writings and enrich their working language. So it's in a way a positive influence. In the case of Yiyun Li, the title of her first short story collection is 1,000 Years of Good Prayers. We all know that's based on a Chinese saying 百年修的同船渡，千年修的共枕眠. So it takes 100 years of cultivation to share a boat ride and 1,000 years of good prayers to sleep on the same pillow. It conveys the idea that fate brings people together and we ought to cherish the encounter and honor each other. So, and the title of her second collection as well, Golden Boy, Emerald Girl, is a Chinese idiom meaning compatible, auspicious lovers. So, so I think yes, there's definitely a constant influence of the mother tongue. And Jing, you asked about my own experience. So in my own case, it's I'll tell you a little story. So a few years ago, there was a total moon eclipse, lunar eclipse, and I got up very early with my husband Michael to get on the balcony in the cold to watch this. And there was a shooting star just went by, and I for whatever reason, I said, look, it looks like a firefly because I've never seen a shooting star before. And Michael was very impressed. And later I tried to trace the origin of that analogy, and I realized it's from Chinese language because shooting star in Chinese language is Liu Xing and firefly is Liu Ying. So because of the word floating star or floating fly, that word Liu, and I connected the two images. So it's in the conscious mind or in the subconscious mind, the mother tongue's linguistic influence.
That's really interesting. And obviously your example more on the positive side, but so but in relation to that, especially in case of Yiyun Li, she has been known as abandoned Chinese language, so moved completely into English. Do you think that the further removed she was from Chinese, her native language, the better she wrote in English? So if so, in that sense, her abandonment of Chinese, for whatever the reasons, was actually essential to her excelling in English writing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think she said she's abandoned the Chinese language, but she particularly said that she hasn't abandoned Chinese poetry. So she when she was young, she wanted to memorize more poems than anybody else. So she certainly has said that Chinese poetry is in her blood, and she has read Dream of the Red Chamber many times in her lifetime. And I listened to a lot of interviews that she gave in Chinese, and in it she open quoted Chinese poetry. So although she's not English is not her working language, but she is strongly influenced by Chinese poetry. I sensed a subtle shift in Where Reasons End, because in it she has quoted a Chinese poem. I prepared it as like a farewell, a thank you gift for the audience. Maybe Jing, you want to read the Chinese and I'll read the English.
Okay, that's really interesting. 少年不识愁滋味儿，爱上层楼，爱上层楼，为赋新诗强说愁。而今识尽愁滋味儿，欲说还休，欲说还休，却道天凉好个秋。
So in Where Reasons End, the mother quoted her own translation of this poem to the son. Said, "When young, I knew not the taste of sorrow, but loved to climb the storied towers. I loved to climb the storied towers to compose a new poem, faking sorrow. Now I have known the taste of sorrow and want to talk about it, but I refrain. I want to talk about it, but refrain, and say merely, a chilly day, what a fine autumn." I find her translation so moving. And also, I feel that the poem epitomizes not only the Chinese poetic device, but also speaks of Li's writing, as she said, what is revealed and what is concealed expose equally. So this is supposed to be my parting gift.
Really, really interesting and fascinating to know more about, public opinion or public saying about her. It sounds like she completely abandoned Chinese, but that's actually not the case. She's been constantly influenced, and she reads a lot of Chinese literature. So also in relation to that question, because I had worked at SBS subtitling department for many years, 23 years. And in our department, we have English editors who edit all our English subtitles, which are translated from any languages or all languages. And the editor don't necessarily understand the original language, so they edit English translations. So I once asked our editor if they, without seeing the film, because the film gives you the visual clue, could they tell what language that the English subtitles came from, assuming there were no cultural reference in the film. And interestingly, they said yes, they could tell which language these English subtitles came from, because the way things were expressed was all different from one language to another. So my question is, of course, the translation is not the same as exophonic writing, but can you tell, or can one tell, if a piece of writing is by a native writer or by an exophonic writer? And for example, can you tell where reasons end? Because where reasons end, there is no reference to China or Chinese. So if people didn't know it was written by Yiyun Li, can you tell, was it written by a native English writer or an exophonic writer?
This is a really hard question because I already know Yiyun Li as she is, so it's hard to judge. But I know that her Must I Go, that's the book that has been translated into Chinese, and Tolstoy together. People's feedback on Must I Go, the Chinese translation, is that had you not known it's written by Yiyun Li, you would have thought it's written by an American, an English native speaker, but they are reading the translation back into Chinese. So that's an interesting, still an interesting feedback, because when they read, they wouldn't be able to tell that this is written by an exophonic writer of Chinese origin. But I also want to add that I have no idea that Nabokov wasn't a native English writer, and of course his English is just so advanced. But sometimes I hear, say for example, Balanchine. Balanchine is a Russian of a Georgian background, the last god in ballet who was in America, so he's like a ballet god, but of that Russian background, although his father's from Georgia. So he, when he spoke, he called himself a cloud in trousers. So just that expression I found is very Russian, and I can't tell why. And it's of course he's quoting a Russian poet, so that's sometimes I can hear that in some people. There's some turn of phrase that sounds foreign.
Maybe that is the charm of exophonic writing.
It could be. It could be. It's interesting that Yiyun Li said that other people reading her book and say that there's so much Buddhism in it, and it's the xiaocheng. I don't know how to say it in English, but it's the Buddhism that has been has migrated to China.
Talking about Nabokov and translation, because he wrote Lolita in English, and when it was translated into Russian, he was very concerned that anyone else would translate the book, because he was concerned that the Russian version would be entirely degraded and botched by some vulgar paraphrases or blunders. So he decided to translate it himself. Yiyun Li, she refused her book to be translated into Chinese until recently, perhaps for other reasons. But I also do wonder if for this reason, because she obviously wouldn't want to translate it into Chinese herself. She wasn't a Chinese writer before she became an English writer. But for you, if you wrote something, would you let other people translate your English writing into Chinese?
Yeah, so I can only borrow other people's experience. So if we look at Jhumpa Lahiri, for people who might not be familiar with her, she was a very successful American writer. But later on, she studied Italian and started to write in Italian. And then when her first book, in other words, was translated by a translator into English, back into English. But for her second book, she did the translation herself. So I think it's almost inevitable for Nabokov. Of course, Nabokov for his early work, I think he had other people working in collaboration with him to do the translation. But for himself, he certainly did the translation for most of his work. But what happened was his autobiography was first published in English, and after that he translated the English into Russian while he was writing Lolita. I don't know where he had the energy, but he did that, and he found that while he was translating it from English into Russian, he was able to overcome certain amnesia. He was able to recall more details. So he did not only translation, but many rewriting and correction. And later on, he had to carry that over into the English version. So he called it something like a metamorphosis that's known only to butterflies.
That's fascinating. That is really interesting, and we know Samuel Beckett, when he was supposed to translate his own work, he actually rewrote quite a bit, and then could come back and influence the original version. That's really
Jing, you reminded me another story. Okay, it's when Paul Auster wanted to put together a collection of French poetry, and Samuel Beckett very generously let him use his translation of other French poets' work. And Paul Auster asked him, what about your own poems that you've written in French? Would you like to include that in the collection? And Samuel Beckett said, I have no energy to do the translation. And Paul Auster said, what about I translate it for you? And Samuel Beckett thought long and hard and said no.
I sort of can understand, because even though one time my short bio was I gave the short bio in English, and then it was translated by Chinese by the conference organizer. I could hardly recognize it. I said, well, this is me. That's not the way I would write my own bio. So it's quite interesting. I have last question before I go to audience. So this is a short but interesting question. You mentioned in your speech, in your talk, saying that Yiyun Li found writing in English is make her feel like a new person. And she could write in the unconstrained manner. So I think that's really the key, because that reminds me of a bit like acting, you know. So when Liang Chaowei, Tony Liang was interviewed and saying that how could you act so real, and when you act, and were you or were you the character? And he said he loved acting is because acting allowed him to be in so many different lives and the characters without risking, you know, like in real life, we risk all sorts of things if you want to be someone else or act like someone else. But acting give you that space to be someone else that was not you, but, you know, you can be very boldly you. Is there something there for Yiyun Li as well? It's kind of, you know, it's unconstrained access to things that she wanted to say. And
I think if I understand her correctly, I think because she actually thinks that because English is her second language, so she tries to understand every word very comprehensively, and she's able to use every word precisely. She says that she uses dictionary a lot. So she's very interested in etymology. So if the word origin, so whether this is a Greek word or this is from Latin, and in where reasons end, it's really the etymology of sorrow, how she has long a passage about the word, where has grief come from, or tragedy. Why is it a goat song? It was quite funny. So she's really when she teaches, she's also focusing on every word has to be precise. So in a way, by speaking English as a second language and writing exophonically, she has an extra discipline about the precision of word use.
That's so fascinating. I can relate to that in ways of when we do the translation. Precision is the right word, you know, like you trying to pin down exactly what it means. But then she's looking for the origin etymology. That's also quite interesting, because and that reminds me of, you know, when people speak for another language, often they do the code switch. They switch to another language. For example, my Arabic students, when one of them did a presentation, he said they're bilingual. Because Arabic is a very formal, especially in written language, very formal, very clean, very neat language. It's very rare that they allow you to swear, you know, especially in a formal way. So when they want to swear, they switch into English. And after they swear, they switch back, because they swear in a quiet language. It gives you less feel, you know, so which I can relate, because I wasn't brought up swearing in Chinese at all, not a word in Chinese. But I can easily swear in English. I don't feel it as much as sharply as in your own language. So there is a code there in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because my friend Peter Boyle, a poet, and he said he once we were all on Zoom, and we said we'll say something in our other language, and he spoke in Spanish, and he became really animated. So I think you are right. There's a code switching sort of gives you a different you can assume a different persona when you want to speak in another language.
Let's go to audience. We have a quite number of questions and comments. And Simon says, has Yiyun Li written anything in Chinese? If she's mainly written in Chinese than English, would she be a better or different writer? That's a speculation. But the first part of a question, I suppose, is factual. Has she ever written in Chinese?
No, not as far as I know. She has done some translation. A Chinese writer that she loves is Shen Congwen, so she's translated Shen Congwen's letters. and she's never written in Chinese, not creatively as far as I know. I just have the feeling that she might continue to be a scientist had she not written in English, because she was studying immunology. She was just about to graduate, and she gave all that up for a life less predictable as a writer.
This is a very interesting question from Yiyun. Yiyun asked, Dr. Li, do you see any commonality among the Chinese writers writing in English? Any gender difference do you see between Chinese men and Chinese women when they adopt English as their writing native, as their writing language? Very interesting question.
Yeah, I must admit that I haven't paid attention to the gender difference. I think Yiyun Li is singularly talented. She's really one of the best writers. I don't really compare her with just women writers. I compare her with all writers, and English or non-English. I think she's really contemporarily one of the best writers. So I haven't noticed. It just happened that I chose Yiyun Li and Jhumpa Lahiri because I'm really familiar with their work for my doctorate study. I can't tell any real difference that I can tease out, as in for writers of for women or for men.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Simon has another question. After her strain of a personal tragedy, she turned to creative writing, to memoirs. Anything to say about it?
Yeah, I think it's a period of time when she couldn't write. This is before the tragedy of her children. So this was a time when she had just she was in a very bleak place mentally, and she was just trying to read. She could only read, she couldn't write. But see what has come out of that reading is this amazing collection of essays. So Yiyun Li said that she teaches creative writing. So she said that it's very difficult to teach writing, but you can always teach reading. So her teaching is largely about reading, and she's really an avid reader. She can read 10 books all at once. So her life, her writing life constitutes both writing and a very large portion is reading.
Another question from the audience of Marcel, and has there been any comparison of Milan Kundera's Czech and French novels? Because since I've I've only read the English translation, I wouldn't know the difference as such.
No, I wouldn't know. I can only comment on the sizes. The French novels seem much smaller. I read them in English translation as well. So I think that what Yiyun Li has accomplished, what he wanted to achieve, is Yiyun Li is really considered an American writer, and I think Milan Kundera was forever a Czech writer in my mind, and I think perhaps Jing in your mind as well. He's a Czech writer, and he would like to be considered a French writer, but perhaps he hadn't been able to.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And that's the comments of my Yiyun Li, artist, and she's also PhD in studied quite a bit about the language and the culture and diaspora experiences in relation to language. So she commented, this is a very rich topic and discussion. Thank you so much for sharing. Marcel has asked another question, but well, I'll be quickly answering because it's long answer. Is it a good idea to introduce words from original language while translating? Yes, in many cases it is, but it depends on circumstances. So, and as you can see that often original language, we call it loan words from other languages into English, and there are so many of them. So yes, throughout the history, loan words have been coming through. Wendy Hu commented, I agree, I really appreciate Yiyun's precision. Having grown up in a Chinese Australian family with a scholarly father, as a reader, my experience of her writing is tempered by Chinese sensibility, but not knowledge of the Chinese language. Another interesting novel was Tongueless, which interweaves Canto with English. As comment, not a question. Two more questions and that. So Cecile says, I am an English speaker, but grew up speaking Arabic with my grandmother. So Afrikaans and Exos, that's the language I know that speaks, there's a comedian, with my nursemates, English with my parents. Later, aged 12, I learned German. As an avid reader, I prefer reading English words written by multilingual writers. That's really interesting. I love Rupa Lahiri for the reason of her Bengali origins. Thank you for this superb presentation, Dr. Isabelle Li, and making me feel at home. Last one from Sally. Sally says, thank you, Isabelle, for such a fascinating talk. I've been reflecting on what you said about writers like Elaine Chang, who write first in English and then translate their novels back into Chinese. When you read the Chinese, can you feel that it was originally written in English through particular choices of words and the syntax? I was just curious if the Chinese carries an English kind of a flavor, like you said. Chu Xiaoling's English. Chu Xiaolong's English carries a strong sense of Chinese.
Yeah, well, when I haven't read Eileen Chang in English. I only read her in Chinese, and she did her own translation of Chidi, of A Naked Land. So I couldn't tell. I didn't know it was first written in English at all until when I was doing my research. I was very surprised.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We have to wind up now because we're 5 minutes past the time. But it's really fascinating and it's so interesting topic. Thank you so much, Isabelle, for this incredible, very insightful talk. And we need to talk more about this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.